For that, we are going to be in Isaiah 7 here for a few minutes this afternoon. Mom and Dad, don't worry, this is a sermonette-ish, so I think I hedged both ways that way. But we're going to be in Isaiah 7 as we prepare to celebrate the birth of Jesus in the coming days. And I was reminded, thinking about this, a couple of weeks ago, my family had the opportunity to go to Gatlinburg for a week. Every year for the past 3 years, my mom's rented a cabin. The whole family's gotten together, spent a few days together. And my highlight of this trip every year is the couple of days that we spend at Dollywood. Now, I don't know if you would peg me for a Dollywood guy, but there's a lot that I enjoy about Dollywood. It's small enough you can walk around the entire park in an hour, very important to me. Whenever we go, most kids are still in school, so it's pretty empty, and it just kind of scratches that itch to be back in Kentucky and Tennessee and that area of the country and to experience a little bit of that. One of the main reasons I love Dollywood is for the roller coasters, which maybe you wouldn't expect it to have some good roller coasters, but it does. And so every couple of hours when we're at Dollywood as a family, me and two of my kids, and I'll keep them anonymous to protect a few of them here, will sneak off and ride all of the big rides that we want to ride that no one else wants to ride, and then come back and rejoin the family. I have one kid who refuses to ride anything. And I thought what I wanted for Christmas more than anything was for this one kid, Luke, for this one kid to ride a roller coaster with me. And so I did what any good parent would do. I started to offer him increasing amounts of money to get on the ride with me. And so after about an hour of negotiating, we discovered my threshold for what I was willing to give him and his threshold for what was enticing enough to get on this ride. And we agreed on a certain amount of money that if he would ride Mystery Mine with me, I would pay him at the end of it. And so as we were walking to the ride, I could tell the nerves were starting to go a little bit, and he wanted me to walk him through everything that he was about to experience, which I knew if I did, he would not get on this ride. Because if I told him that when you go up the first hill on this roller coaster, you don't just go up it, it lays you flat back like you're laying down, and you go up at this. If I told him about the drop and the loops and the corkscrews and all of the things, I knew there was no chance he was going to go on this ride. And so I just had to try and convince him with this. I have ridden this ride before. It didn't kill me. I'm not going to ask you to do anything that would actually hurt you. And I'll be sitting next to you the entire ride. And so that was enough. And he got on this ride with me, and I think he enjoyed it. But in that moment, he had a decision that he had to make. As I was making these promises to him, I'll be there with you. It's not going to hurt you. I think you'll actually enjoy this. He had to answer the question, do I trust my dad enough to believe him and to do this thing that I don't want to do? King Ahaz is asking a similar question in Isaiah 7, not about a roller coaster, but about something that God was asking him to do, something that he didn't want to do. That God comes to Ahaz and he has a request for him, and to be honest, if Ahaz followed God's advice in this situation, it was going to be terrifying and scary, and he had to answer the question, do I trust God enough to do what God is asking me to do? We read this in Isaiah 7, 1 and 2. In the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, son of Uzziah, the king of Judah, Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, the king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to wage war against it, but would not yet mount an attack against it. When the house of David was told, Syria is in league with Ephraim, the heart of Ahaz and the heart of his people shook as the trees of the forest shook before the wind. I know you're sitting here thinking, this is a Christmas Eve service. What are we doing in Isaiah 7? You're going to get to a really familiar part here in a second. Just hang on. We noted several times that there was a major issue facing Israel at the time Isaiah is written, and they have plenty of reasons to be terrified as we read Isaiah chapter 7. They were facing the prospect of the Assyrians coming in and conquering them and driving them out of the promised land. But there was also another fear that they had, and it was this. Not only were they fearful of the Assyrians, but by this point in history, Israel had broken into two distinct groups. You had the northern kingdom, Israel, and you had the southern kingdom, Judah. And we read here in Isaiah 7 that the king of the northern kingdom made an alliance with the king of Syria to try and protect themselves from the Assyrians. And now they're pressuring Ahaz, the king of Judah, to join them. And so Ahaz is faced with an almost impossible decision here. Does he join this alliance and make himself an enemy of the Assyrians, the most powerful group of people on the earth at the time? Or does he refuse to join the alliance, and these two kings have plotted, if he does that, we're going to come, we're going to kill Ahaz, and we're going to install a king who will join us in this. This is a no-win situation for King Ahaz. It seems like either choice he makes will lead to a war that he's unlikely to win and could cost him his life. And this leads the prophet Isaiah to come and visit Ahaz and say this, verse 3, the Lord said to Isaiah, go and meet Ahaz, you and Shear-Jashub your son, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field. Isaiah finds Ahaz checking on the city's water supply. Because if you were in an invading army in this time, one of the easiest ways to wreak havoc on a city that you wanted to capture was to upend their water supply and basically keep the people from having what they need to survive. But Isaiah comes to Ahaz in verse 4 and he says this, and say to him, be careful, be quiet, do not fear. And do not let your heart be faint because of these two smoldering stumps of firebrands. At the fierce anger of Rezin and Syria, at the fierce anger of Rezin and Syria and the son of Remaliah, because Syria with Ephraim and the son of Remaliah has devised evil against you, saying. And so Isaiah comes to Ahaz and he has a quick piece of encouragement for him here. And that encouragement is this: in this no-win situation you find yourself in, do not fear. Be quiet and do not let your heart be faint. Isaiah's fear is this, that Ahaz will make a decision out of fear in this moment about what to do. And when we make decisions out of fear, rarely do we make the right decision. Rather, Isaiah says to Ahaz, here's what you should do, chapter 7, verse 7. Thus says the Lord God, these things will not stand, and it shall not come to pass. What does Isaiah want Ahaz to do? He wants him to do nothing. Don't join the Assyrians and ask them for protection. Don't join this alliance against the Assyrians. Trust God. Trust that He will protect you. Trust that He will provide for you. And He says the reason that you can do this is because God has already decided they will not succeed against you. And so again, Isaiah is pleading with Ahaz, don't trust in other nations to protect you right now. Trust in God and God alone to deliver you and to rescue you. And then incredibly, Isaiah offers to Ahaz this unbelievable opportunity to be able to trust God's promises when he says, this is what God has said, if you trust Him, He will deliver you. And then verse 10, and the Lord spoke to Ahaz, I want you to ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven. Here's the offer Ahaz has given. You should trust the Lord in this situation. And so that you know you can trust the Lord, ask Him for a sign and He will do anything. He says here, let it be as deep as Sheol or as high as heaven. Ask for an audacious sign of the Lord, Isaiah says, and God will do it, and then you will know that you can trust Him. How many of us, when we're questioning God or questioning what to do or when it's difficult to be obedient to God, wouldn't give anything to have the opportunity to receive a sign from God to know that we can trust Him? But that's the opportunity that Ahaz has here. But look at how he responds in verse 12. But Ahaz said, I will not ask and I will not put the Lord to the test. Now this sounds very pious. This sounds like for pure reasons Ahaz is saying, I'm not going to ask God for a sign. And yet what Isaiah reveals is there's actually other motives that are driving Ahaz to not ask God for a sign here. And that motive is this: he doesn't want to trust God in this situation. He doesn't want to believe that God will protect him because he doesn't want to give control over of the situation that he's in. It feels safe for Ahaz to do what he's going to do. He feels like he has a good plan in place, but to trust God and to believe God in this situation would require him to give up control. And so Ahaz says, I'm not going to ask God for a sign, in essence, because I really don't want to do what God is asking me to do here. It's as if living from a place of fear was much more comfortable to Ahaz than having to live from a place of faith. And I think that's something many of us can resonate with. This is how Isaiah responds, the last little bit of Isaiah 7 that we'll see here. And Isaiah said, Hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you to weary men? Then you weary my God also. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and you shall call his name Emmanuel. Because of Ahaz's decision not to trust God here, things got really bad for Judah over the next few years. Eventually they are conquered and they're driven out of the promised land. However, even as the people were suffering the consequences of this sin here, God wants them to remember something here in Isaiah 7:13 and 14. Even in their sin, even in their failure, even in the suffering they were about to experience, God wanted them to know this: He was still going to be with them. Why could Ahaz and the people trust God when their circumstances made it difficult to trust God, or their circumstances made it difficult to believe God? Why could they trust God in the midst of their fear? Because God promised to be right there with them through it all, even when they didn't deserve His presence. And in the future, God would seal this promise with the birth of a child. This child's name, Emmanuel, which means God with us, was meant to be a reminder of these things. And initially, this was fulfilled in a small way through the birth of Isaiah's own son. But at a much deeper level, this was a promise that God fulfilled some 800 years after Ahaz was king. Because one night a man named Joseph was asleep when suddenly an angel came to him in a dream. And Joseph had been struggling the past few days because he's just discovered that his fiancée is pregnant and he knew the baby wasn't his and he wasn't sure what to do in a situation like this. And then we read in Matthew 1, 20 to 23, of verses you're probably all familiar with. But as he considered these things, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife. For that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. In Ahaz's day, the people were faced with the question, can we trust God even when it's difficult? And God tried to assure them that they could by promising to be with them. But in Matthew 1, God takes this promise a step further because maybe we're asking the same question, can we trust God today? And what we discover in Matthew 1 is that not only did God promise to be with his people in some spiritual sense, but that through the birth of Jesus, what we celebrate over the next 2 days, God actually came to be with human beings as a human being. That what is promised or what is told in Matthew 1 is that through the birth of Jesus, and this is an incredible statement to try and wrap our minds around, the second person of the Trinity was about to become a human being. Again, we talked about this Sunday, but this should always stir up a sense of awe in us. And like Israel in Isaiah's day, we face many enemies as well. Not the Assyrians anymore. I doubt you woke up too worried about them, but the New Testament does tell us that every human being who has ever lived faces two great enemies in this life, sin and death. And if you come back tomorrow, we're going to talk about how Jesus conquers those two great enemies. But the only point I want to make tonight is this, is that as people who live on this earth, who live in the face of enemies that we cannot overcome on our own, again, our rebellion against God and the death that is a consequence of that, maybe you find yourselves at times looking around and asking the question, in a world that seems to be spiraling out of control with all the darkness that I see around me, with all of the things that are going on in my life right now, if there is a God, why can I trust him? Why can I trust God in the midst of a world like this? Or maybe the question you're asking is this, can I trust God and step out in faith and finally put my faith in him? Or can I trust God and do the hard thing that he's asking me to do, even though I don't know how it's going to turn out? Can I trust God and remain faithful to him even when it feels like my life is falling apart? Or can I trust God and put him at the center of my life even though I know it will cost me things that the world tells me is important? That question, can I trust God and do whatever He's asking me to do, is one of the most important questions we'll ever answer. And that's not a question I can answer for you, but I do know this, and this is the point of our text tonight. If you're willing to put your trust in Jesus, if you're willing to love Him above all else, I don't know what your life is going to look like, but I do know that what we celebrate this Christmas season, the birth of Jesus, means that He promises to be with you through it all. And it's not just that God promises to be with us again in some spiritual sense, but because God came to this earth as a man, He came to be with us as a human, and not only to come to be on earth with us as a human being, but to experience the life that you and I are experiencing right now. God has truly walked a mile in our shoes through the birth of Jesus. And what that means is this, is that in many ways life is a lot like a roller coaster that we don't know what's coming next. There's ups and downs, there's twists and turns, there's things we can't see coming, but because God became a man, we know that He's ridden the ride that you and I are on right now. He knows the twists and turns, and He's lived to tell the tale. He's faced temptation. That through Jesus, God has wrestled with trusting God's promises. He's been betrayed by those closest to Him. He knows what it's like to not have much, and He knows what it's like even to take His last breath and be laid in a grave. The encouragement of Christmas is this: God is not inviting you to trust Him as someone who does not know what you're going through in this life. He's inviting you to trust Him as someone who's been through this life and who promises to be in the seat next to you as you experience everything that will happen to you in the future. That's an incredible reason to be able to trust Him. I'll close with this. In an article for Christian Standard Magazine, Matt Proctor, who's a professor at Ozark Christian College, tells this story. He says, "My 5-year-old Carl and my 3-year-old Conrad love it when I dress like them. After they put on jeans and a blue t-shirt, they'll come and ask me to wear jeans and a blue t-shirt. And when I do, they have a saying. They will survey me, they'll survey themselves and say, 'Look, Dad, same, same.' For my birthday, Carl bought me a North Carolina blue mesh shirt because he has a North Carolina blue mesh shirt. We could be same, same when we both had them on. When I play living room football with my boys, Conrad won't let me play standing up. So big and scary and towering above him. The theological term for this is completely other. Instead, he insists I get on my knees. And when I'm down at eye level, Conrad puts his hand on my shoulder and says, 'There, see, Dad, same, same.' They like it when I enter their world." He says, "This summer I scraped my leg working on my house, and when Conrad fell down and scraped his leg, he pointed at my scab and showed me his and said, 'Hey, Dad, same, same.'" Here's the point, he writes. God Himself has felt what we feel. In the incarnation, through the birth of Jesus, He chose not to stay completely other. God got down at eye level, and in the incarnation, God experienced what it's like to be tired and discouraged. He knows what it's like to hurt and bleed. On the cross, Jesus Himself prayed a psalm of lament. My God, why have you forsaken me?" In your pain, you may be tempted to say, "God, you have no idea what I'm going through. You have no idea how bad I'm hurting." But God can respond, "Yes, I do." And He can point to your wounds, and then He can point to His own. And He can say, "Look, same, same, me too. I've entered your world. I know how you feel. I've been there. I'm with you now. I care, and I can help." This is what Christmas is all about. The band can come up, and we're going to get ready to sing here in just a second. We all have a decision to make this Christmas season. Will we trust Jesus? Will we step into faith? Will we step into obedience? Will we remain faithful even when it's difficult? That's a scary decision to make. To trust someone with your entire life, to hand control of who you are over to someone else. That's terrifying. But God is not asking you to blindly trust Him. He's asking you to trust Him as someone who has taken on flesh, who's lived the life that you've lived, and who now has the ability to lead us as a sure and steady guide. That constant presence of Jesus is our promise that we can hold on to, as he told his disciples before he departed this earth. Matthew 28:20, behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. That's a promise that began the night Jesus was born. That's a promise that's at work in our lives today. And that's a promise that we can hang on to into the future. I'm going to pray and we'll sing.